Hey guys, and welcome to my ranged gearing guide for 2019. When you're ready, grab your cup of tea, sit back, relax and enjoy. So what will this gearing guide cover? This gearing guide will cover power versus tank armor for ranged, all gear slots explained slot by slot, and me briefly going over the different kinds of ammunition you have and which you want to look out for, especially the back criminal bolts, an invention perk setup example, and the low to high tier builds, plus their cost and the upgrades you want to be getting, which are always optional. And I cannot stress this enough, as with the previous guides, people that are low level and elitists or very high top tier PVMers criticized different parts of the upgrade order list. I cannot please everyone, and that's why the disclaimer is on screen now. If you wish to read it, go ahead. This is an in-depth but generalized gearing guide. Let's go. So, power armor versus tank armor. I'm going to be covering this very briefly. Now, I do know I've covered this in my melee and magic gearing guide, but I have to cover it again, and it's going to be very similar information. In fact, almost the same. Always pick power armor over tank armor. This has to do with the fact that power armor itself usually has a decent defense bonus on its own compared to tank armor, which usually has higher defense bonus. In fact, not usually, all of the time, and sometimes has a life point bonus. Power armor, on the other hand, has a damage bonus or a ranged strength bonus. This is better in most situations, as damage far outweighs the defense or life point bonus you're getting with tank armor, except for certain situations which are very specific. But like I said, this is a general gearing guide, so generally speaking you want to be picking power armor over tank armor. Kicking off with the gear slots, we first have the armor slots, consisting of a body, legs and helmet slot. As you guys can see, there are some examples, or actually all the examples, of just pure ranged armor on screen, level 70 plus. You can only see the stats and costs of the body, so please ignore those stats. It will, however, show you which armors are tank and power armor. The power armors give you a ranged bonus. This is just to give you a general overview of the ranged armor out there. We will be getting more into the ranged armor and which ones you want to be using at the builds section. If you're Robin Hood, you need to protect your feet. On screen now are some boot examples for ranged gear. For most of you out there, you're going to be sticking with the Armadillo or with the Pernix boots if you have a little bit more money and higher stats. You will only upgrade later on in game at the higher tiers if you have more money to spend for a very minimal but still a ranged bonus increase and a slight armor bonus from the higher tiered boots. You also have gloves, as you need to protect your hands and get that extra damage bonus. Some great examples are on screen now. Now, two of which really stand out. Those are the Cinderbane gloves and the Death Touch bracelet, which, yes, is a gloves slot item. This item in fact has a very nice passive. It actually has a chance, 1 in 5 chance, of reflecting 25 to 50% of the damage taken back onto your opponent. As for the Cinderbanes, they have a chance to poison your target. Not all heroes wear capes, but you do. These are some great examples for capes for your ranged gear setup. The Max Cape, the Comp Cape, Ava's Alerter or Accumulator, a Obsidian Cape, Combatant's Cape, which is actually a cape which you can add 2 combat perks to, so for ranged I suggest Defense and Constitution, though that's, let's move on. Skill Capes, of course, the Cape of Legends, which is obtained from the quest, the Legends quest, and a Kiln Cape. Of course, there's also a bunch of good necklaces out there for ranged as well, the best of which pretty much being the Amulet of Souls, or for some situations the Reaper necklace, or the ornament versions of either of those. The Reaper necklace is good thanks to its accuracy boost and high stats. The Dragon Rider amulet is a good one, the Sardoma's Murmur is a good one, which is pretty cheap, couple 100k. The Farsight Sniper necklace is good, which is actually an upgraded necklace using a Chaotic Remnant on the Sardoma's Murmur. And it can be turned into the Blood version using a Blood Amulet Shard. The Desert Amulet 3 and 4 are also two good amulets. The Amulet of the Forsaken is a Amulet of Fury, trimmed, normal or Blood version are also great. The trimmed version actually cannot be turned into a Blood Amulet if you were wondering, and the Amulet of Ranging and Amulet of Glory bit lower level options are also options. As for your pocket slot, you want to be using a god book, the blood essences. You can use crushing items like the charming imp, the bone crusher, herbicide, unless you've added those to your tool belt using the slayer points. You can use the insignias or scrimshaws, and some of which are actually pretty useful, like the scrimshaw of cruelty, which increases your ranged attack damage, or the scrimshaw of ranging, which increases your ranged accuracy. You of course also have a bunch of useful rings in game, ranging from questing rings to Bible rings to luck rings, or useful rings for PvM like the Ring of Death, which is best in slot and has a useful passive of saving you money if you die by using your rings charge when you die. A bunch of these are great. I'll be covering the ones that you want to be using in the gearing guides. Let's move on. And of course, just to mention them, the shields, even though you guys will probably not be using them, and I always recommend using an offhand weapon instead of a shield, as otherwise you're missing out on damage. And if you are doing a tanking role, or for some reason something specific that requires a shield, that's why I'm mentioning this, but it's usually very specific. Another very specific item or slot is the sigil slot. And just like my magic and melee guide, I just want to mention it so that I've actually covered it, because it is an item that can increase your PvM experience and help you out a bit, but generally speaking they are only used at the higher tier of PvM, and if I wouldn't cover this you wouldn't know about it if you don't know about these sigil slots, so I thought I'd mention them. Now to something that is more interesting, an overview of most of the ranging weapons. There are a ton of ranged weapons above level 70. There's bows, there's crossbows, there's darts, there's throwing weapons, there's throwing knives, throwing axes, two-handed, main-handed, one-handed. There's a bunch of weapons. They're on screen now for you to view. I will be covering which weapons are best at the gearing section, however. This is just to show you what options you have. Some of these are locked behind quests, some of these are not, some of these are locked behind a agility requirement for a quest. As for something you might be thinking, what's better? Is it dual wield or is it two-handed? Well, that again is situational. I can tell you that, for example, Ascension crossbows with ruby bacriminal bolts and diamond bacriminal bolts enchanted can be very good at necks. Just an example. Speaking of ammunition, look at that. A massive overview of most of the ranged ammo in game. You know those bacriminal bolts I was speaking about, the enchanted version? At the lower part of this image, you guys can actually see all of them in an overview. You can read all the effects if you wish to find out which ones you want to be using. The normal ammunition is in the middle part of this image, and at the top you guys can see some special ammunition for some special weapons. For these special weapons, the lizards or salamanders, at least the level 70 version, the black salamander which shoots Harlander tar, it's a very good budget weapon if you really don't have any money whatsoever for level 70 plus ranged. I really wanted to mention the special bacriminal bolt ammo, but I will not be taking this into consideration in terms of the higher gear setups later on in this video. I'll just be generalizing what's a cheaper and more efficient build to buy, and the upgrade order will not be specific to certain crossbows with certain ammo, as that's just way too specific. And before I get into the first gearing build, I just want to cover some useful auras for ranged bossing, PvM and Slayer. The first of which is the Reckless Aura, which gives you a ranged damage increase at the cost of your defense. The Sharpshooter Aura increases your ranged accuracy, and the Vampirism Aura heals you from damage that you do, much like Soul Split. A very good option indeed if you're a mid-level player. The Penance Aura actually increases your prayer points, or gives you prayer points from the damage that you take. Kind of like an inverted Soul Split or whatever, but then for prayer points. So for the invention perk setup example, you can have 2 gizmo slots in a augmented two-handed weapon, whether that's a two-handed crossbow or two-handed bow or whatever else it could be. 1 gizmo slot on your main hand weapon, 1 gizmo slot on your offhand weapon, for example a offhand crossbow, and 2 gizmo slots on your body and legs. So as for the budget perk examples, for your weapon you want to have Precise 5 Equilibrium 2 if you're using a two-handed weapon, and yes, that is two different gizmos, a Precise 5 gizmo made from the armour components, which you can get from War Priest, which is why it's a budget perk example, as it's pretty cheap, or Precise 3 Equilibrium 2. As for your budget perks for your dual wield weapons, you want to have Precise 3 Equilibrium 2 on your weapon, or your main hand weapon, and Flanking 2 in your offhand. Honestly, if you're, dual wielding, don't worry too much about your perks, as you can always remove them later on for some better perks. And then Flanking will become a switch. As for your body, you want to have Crackling 2 and Biting 2 on there. For your legs, Impatient 2 and Enhanced Devoted 3. So if you guys don't know what Crackling and Biting 2 do, for example, I'm just going to explain that real quickly, although you can read it up on the wiki. So Crackling periodically zaps your opponent or target for 50% of your weapon damage per rank, or 10% in PvP, but this is, we're not talking about PvP here, are we? As for Biting, you get a plus 2% chance per rank to critically hit opponents. For Impatient, you have a 9% chance per rank for basic abilities to generate 3% extra adrenaline. And for Devoted and Enhanced Devoted, you have a percentage chance of your protection praise working 75 or 100% depending on which version you have. 100% being with the Enhanced Devoted perk. Basically imitating the ability called Devoted if you are not aware of this ability. Some other options for your armor would be Absorptive 3, Venom Blood, and the Slayer perks on your weapons or armor. I'll leave a link to the invention perks in the description down below so that you guys can read up on whatever perk you'd like. Moving on to the good perk setup example, costing a bit more. For your two-handed weapon you want to have Aftershock 3 on that in your first gizmo shell. If you're lucky, you have Invigorating 1 on that as well. And for your second gizmo shell on your two-handed weapon, you want to have Precise 4 Equilibrium 2. Now if you're a bit less lucky, like myself, or you don't have as much money, you can have Aftershock 3, Precise 3 Equilibrium 2 being two separate gizmos, as well as an alternative option. As for your dual wield weapons, for your main hand, you want to have Aftershock 3 plus Precise 1 if you're lucky, because just never put Aftershock on your offhand weapon, because if you switch to a shield or switch, you will lose the build-up percentage of that Aftershock perk, which causes the explosion. So yeah, put that on your main hand weapon. As for your offhand, you want to have Precise 4 Equilibrium 2, or alternatively, if you have a little bit less luck or money, use Precise 3 Equilibrium 2. As for your body, you want to use Crackling 3, plus Mobile if you're lucky, and Biting 3, which is extremely expensive. Again, for this entire perk setup, you can always use Biting 2 if you wish to, which is cheaper. As for your legs, you want Enhanced Devoted or Normal Devoted 3 and Impatient 3. Again, alternatively, you could use Absorptive if you really want to. For your shield switch, you want to have Turtling 3. For your offhand switch, you want to use Flanking 3, and for your main hand switch, for the Deft Swiftness and Sunshine abilities, you want to have Planted Feet perk, and if you're lucky, you have Aftershock 1 on that as well. For those of you that do not know, the duration of Sunshine and Deft Swiftness is actually increased by 1/4 or 25% using the Planted Feet perk. You will lose the damage that monsters take when they stand in proximity of your Sunshine or Deft Swiftness ability, however, with this perk. Let's move on to the first mid-tier build, and I'm going to say this right now, I'm assuming you will be augmenting your gear after mid to high levels, because I will not be putting certain perk examples in the gearing upgrade lists. So just augment your gear if you're a higher level player, because it's definitely worth doing. So for the low tier build, we have a build that requires level 70 combat stats, being level 70 ranged and 70 armor duel. Though if you want to upgrade, your range level will have to become higher for the higher tiered weapons in the upgrade by order list. So what does this first build consist of? It consists of full armored armor being the biggest part of the build cost. Or alternatively, if you really don't have any money whatsoever, you can use Royal Dragonhide costing probably 100k for the full set instead, but that's level 65 armor. As for your weapon, you want to be using a crystal bow if you've completed the Roving Elves quest. The nice thing about the crystal bow is that it requires 0 ammunition as it generates its own. As for the Black Salamander, however, you will have to be using Harlander tar. But it's a very cheap weapon and the crystal bow is a couple 100k. As for your cape slots or backpack slots, you want to use Ava's Alerter. This is actually obtained from partly completing the Do No Evil quest, after upgrading your Ava's accumulator to the alerter. Alternatively, you can also use an obsidian cape, costing around 100k. As for your amulet and ring, you want to be using a Sourdoughness Murmur and an Archer's Ring, both being pretty cheap. Now, the total of this build will cost you 12 million GP. Now, that doesn't sound too bad, and it really is not. It's actually really affordable to have a low tier ranged build. As for your upgrade by order, they will actually still stay cheap. The first upgrade is a Dwarven Hand Cannon, or just Hand Cannon. This is a ranged weapon that requires level 75 ranged and 61 fire making to equip, and it requires the completion of the Forgiveness of a Chaos Dwarf quest. Now, if you don't like completing quests, just stick to your crystal bow to level 80, or buy armor crossbows in between, but those are pretty expensive. Anyways, the hand cannon shoots hand cannon shots, and it costs 675k. The next upgrade at level 80, being the cheapest option, is the Royal Crossbow, only costing 380k. That's extremely cheap for a tier 80 weapon. Now, the reason it's so cheap is because QBD has been farmed so much, and it drops the pieces of the Royal Crossbow. To make the Royal Crossbow, you require all 4 pieces. You will require the Royal Bolt Stabilizer, the Royal Frame, the Royal Sight, and the Royal Torsion Spring. Now, to create this crossbow, you actually have to forge it using the Queen Black Dragon's Fire, essentially meaning you have to get 1 kill, because you have to make the crossbow in the last phase, where the Queen Black Dragon uses her big special super hot fire, and then you can forge your crossbow. I actually have a guide on this, which I'll link in the description below, though it's a pretty old guide, and I used to be not as clear as I am right now with my more recent guides. So hopefully that will help. Anyways, the next upgrade would be the tier 85 Shadow Glaives. These glaives are dual wield weapons costing 10.5 million GP and are both dropped from the boss called Grigorovic from God Wars Dungeon 2. These are great weapons and especially good for the price. As for items you want to get or focus on, the Ring of Vigor, the Enhanced Excalibur, and the auras like the Reckless or Sharpshooter aura, which can help you out. But don't worry too much about these just yet. You're probably better off getting a Vampirism aura if you're a lower level to help with Slayer and low tier bossing. The Ring of Vigor actually requires you to have 50,000 Dungeoneering tokens, which as a low level player may seem like much, but it is worth it in the long run. Though you're better off getting your Charming Imp first. I'm just mentioning that in case you were thinking, which of the two should I get first? Get the Charming Imp, it's going to help you with summoning. Moving up to the mid-tier build, the cost is going to get kicked up a bit more, costing 64 million in total. But you are getting some serious gear for that price. As you guys can see, we have the Shadow Glaives included in the upgrade list of the low tier build, back at it again. So this build requires 85 plus combat stats and at the bare minimum 80 defense and 85 ranged. As for the items of this build, it's going to be Pernix Armor, being the tier 80 power armor dropped from Nex, Shadow Glaives, Ava's Alert is going to stick around. If you have a skill cape or whatever, use that instead, especially if it's the defense skill cape for the Sign of Life option or perk. And the Sourdoughness Murmur and Archer's Ring, normal version or imbued, are here to stay once more just because they are very cheap. Though in the upgrade list there is a Blood Amulet of Fury if you want to have some extra healing while doing Slayer or low tier bosses where it works at. As for your gloves and boots, just stick to Armor right now, and in the upgrade by order we will be upgrading these. Now if you want armor that does not degrade and is a little bit cheaper than Pernix, you can go ahead and use the Anima Core of Zamorak armor, being the tier 80 power armor that is non-degradable for ranged. Though if you're augmenting your gear, you might as well get Pernix. It's only 5 million more for the legs, body and helmets, and you get an extra life point bonus as well. So it's definitely worth getting if you're augmenting your gear or are planning to. As for your upgrade by order, the first upgrade you want will be a pretty minimal one. It's the Decimation T87 bow, costing 39 million GP. Though if you want to save up a bit more because the upgrade is so minimal, you might as well go ahead and get yourself a Noxious Longbow, being the tier 90 weapon that uses Araxite arrows costing 130 mil. Definitely a very good weapon. After that you want to go ahead and get yourself a Blood Fury. Although, if you do not want the Blood Fury and you want to get into PvM more and you don't like Slayer and such, get a Amulet of Souls instead. I will be covering this in the high tier build, however, and this is a mid tier build, and in my opinion, a Blood Fury is so damn useful at the mid levels. I used to be a mid level player, I have alt accounts, and I always use the Blood Amulet of Fury because it's a very good overall all-round amulet. Even more so because it's for all combat styles, and if you're doing ranged, magic and melee all at the same time, or switching it about during Slayer or low tier to mid tier PvM, this is definitely a go-to amulet. As for the next upgrade, it's a pretty cheap one, costing 3.6 million GP, being the Ascension Grips. Do keep in mind these degrade to dust, but they are T90 power gloves, and are definitely worth getting, at least if you have the money to spare. Then you want to go ahead and get yourself some Pernix boots, being better than the armored ones, costing 8 mil GP, and luckily do not degrade to dust and are repairable. As for the items to get, it's pretty similar except for the Asylum Surgeon's ring, which is on there now. It's a very good ring overall. The only thing you have to do is complete the Broken Home quest a second and third time under a certain time period, because you have to get all the achievements and complete it under a certain amount of time, and then you unlock this ring. Otherwise you'll be getting the Asylum's Doctor's ring, which really is not worth using. Kicking off with the first, cheaper, high tier build, we have a build that requires, of course, level 90 plus combat stats. The items consist of Ascension Grips, Augmented Superior Morrigan's Armor, which degrades to dust, sadly. I know in the picture it is the regular Morrigan's Armor, but I could not get a high quality image of the superior version for whatever reason. As for your ring, the Asylum Surgeon's Ring, or Luck of the Dwarves, or whatever else you have. For your cape, you want a Kiln Cape or Skill Cape, preferably the Defense Skill Cape for example. As for your boots, use Pernix boots. The weapon, a Noxious Longbow, great tier 90 weapon, cheapest of them all, and best in most situations thanks to the range, unless you're using the Criminal Bolts, which I did cover at the ammo section, and it's very specific again. It's a general gearing guide. I do not want to get into very specific situations, but Ascension crossbows can be better at certain bosses, especially if you're switching. In fact, I might make a very efficient gearing guide in the future for bossing. This is more of, well, at least the people watching this video, you right now, I'm pretty sure you're watching this for a general direction to head in for gear. As for your necklace, you want to be using a Farsight Sniper necklace, which can be turned into the Blood version using a Blood Necklace Shard. This will cost you more GP, however. And for the items you want to be getting, the only things I've really added apart from the auras which are already there and such, is the Invention and Summoning skill, and of course the Herblore skill for the overloads and combination overloads, which are super useful if you want to do any kind of PvM, Slayer, bossing, whatever it may be, even PvP, even though PvP, you know, Runescape 3, lol. But yeah, those are there. Get those unlocked, get a higher level in Herblore and Invention to benefit from the perks and such. As for the upgrade by order, get yourself a Ring of Death first, costing 27 million GP, best in slot ring, nice little passive to save you money, using the Rings charge instead of costing you GP when dying, and saves your familiar as well. Then get yourself an Amulet of Souls, very nice amulet, 26 million GP, good stats, two in fact, one of which has a 50% chance of soul split healing 25 to 50% more, an average of 18.75% according to the wiki, and the base damage reduction of protection prayers or curses is increased by 10%, giving them 60% damage reduction instead of 50%. And then you have yourself an option, get yourself Nightmare Gauntlets or Cinderbanes. Now Nightmare Gauntlets are pretty nice, as they let you use Snipe while running around, and they increase the hit chance of Snipe itself by 25%. So this is a very good PvM item, especially if you're running around during bossing, or even with some Slayer monsters. But the Cinderbanes are also very good, though they cost 11 million GP more. They do, however, poison all monsters you attack, which are, of course, not immune to poison. So in my opinion, if you're doing Slayer and lots of monsters that can be poisoned, or bosses even, get those Cinderbanes. They're very nice. If you're doing more stuff like necks and stuff, then get yourself those Nightmare Gauntlets. And they are cheaper, so that's nice. Let's move on to the more expensive high tier build. As for your second high tier build, whip out your wallet because you're going to be spending 261 million GP, and that's without invention perks added to the cost. The item list consists of Cinderbane gloves, which could also be Nightmare Gauntlets if you wish to. The Ring of Death, of course, a Kiln Cape or Skill Cape, Max Cape, Con Cape, whatever you have which is best in slot. An Amulet of Souls could also be the ornament version if you already have it, but if not, don't get it first. You have better stuff to buy first. The Elite Ranger boots being the best in slot boots apart from the tier 90 ones. The only reason I'm not recommending those is because these Elite Ranger boots are much cheaper and only have one less ranged bonus. As for your weapon, a Noxious Longbow, which could also be Ascensions or any other tier 90 in the future, and Sirenic Armor, of course. Now this Sirenic Armor, I cannot stress this enough, augment your legs and body, otherwise they will degrade to dust, much like the helmet will, or head item, whatever you call it. Because if you do not, and you wear this Sirenic Armor, even if it's just for a second, you cannot augment it anymore, and you'll have to kill yourself in the red portal or the wilderness by a friend, or let yourself be killed and sell the Sirenic scales to get a new set to augment. So always augment that Sirenic Armor, put those perks on there, because you are spending a lot of money to get this armor. And then we come to the upgrade by order. So the first upgrade you want to have if you're going to be getting into bossing is definitely the Death Touch bracelet, costing 27 million GP. This is because of the passive effect that gives you a 1 in 5% chance of reflecting 25 to 50% of the damage taken back onto opponents. This is extremely good for PvM and even for high level Slayer. Definitely worth the price. But you can always stick with the Cinderbanes if you wish to as well. As for your next upgrade, definitely get yourself the tier 99 Prayer, called Desolation from a Prey Soul Codex, which is the purple little book you see on screen, costing 535 million GP. Now if you're bossing, most of the time, in fact 99% of the time, the tier 99 Prayer is going to be a little bit more damage increase than a tier 92 weapon, which is the next upgrade. And the only reason you want tier 99 prayers or tier 92 weapon are for very high tier PvM, like Chelos. And if you're not using prayers there, then what are you doing in this game? Anyways, the next upgrade is a tier 92 weapon. Now I put varies for the price because you can get whichever one you want most. But some of the tier 92s actually have a special ability which is very good. An example of this would be the tier 92 crossbow and the tier 92 bow. The Saren Goldbow, for example, has an ability that shoots arrows into the air, 5 to be exact, and each of those arrows does 50 to 200% ability damage if they hit. And the Eldritch crossbow has a ability that for 15 seconds, instead of healing the player when you activate this ability, the Soul Split curse actually damages the player's target. So a boss for 4 times the amount of life points you would have been healed, which I heard currently there's a bug going on or something, and this might be nerfed in the future, so I don't want to get into this because I do not have the weapon myself. I'm not as informed of the specifics and such of this weapon, so get yourself a tier 92 afterwards. It's going to be worth it. Then get yourself some various prize PvM items like the Reaper Necklace, Ingenuity of Humans, Ephemer's Grimoire, an ornament kit for the Amulet of Souls, the Book of Death, and definitely get your gear perked out to the fullest. And other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed my general but in-depth gearing guide for ranged. If you want to check out the magical melee versions, I will link them in the description below and add them to the card section of this video. Thanks for watching, leave a like if you enjoyed, and maybe even consider subscribing, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.